All right, here we go. Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Thursday, January 31st. Tomorrow's February 1. We're making headway. 2019 of the Edina Housing and Redevelopment Authority. Roll call, please.
Commissioner Fisher.
Here.
Commissioner Swanson. Commissioner Brindle.
Here.
Commissioner Anderson.
Here.
Chair Hovland.
Here. Our fellow commissioner, Kevin Staunton, is with a group of local government leaders up in northwest Minnesota. So isn't that a grand time to be up in northwest Minnesota, where it's 40 below in Thief River Falls this morning. I think that's where he is. All the way north to Kitson County and Hallock. So we'll await his return. We've got a meeting agenda in front of us this morning. Is there anyone who wishes to modify or amend the meeting agenda? Otherwise, I'll entertain a motion to adopt the agenda as shown.
So moved.
Second.
Got a motion and a second to adopt the agenda as shown. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Carried. Community comment. Is there anyone in the audience who wishes to address the HRA on a matter that's not otherwise on the agenda this morning? All right. Seeing no one coming forward, hearing nothing. We'll move on to the next portion of the agenda, which is the consent agenda. Is there anyone on the HRA, any of the commissioners desire to remove anything from the consent agenda? Otherwise, I'll entertain a motion to adopt the consent agenda as shown.
So moved.
Second.
Got a motion and second to adopt the consent agenda as shown. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Carried. And then reports and recommendations. In the first matter we have in front of us this morning is a topic that's going to be introduced by Stephanie Hawkinson, our Affordable Housing Development Manager. Ms. Hawkinson, welcome.
Thank you. Good morning. I would like to cede some of my time to Ann Swanson, who is on the Edina Housing Foundation, as this is a matter that pertains to the foundation.
Good morning.
Hello, my name's Ann Swanson. I live at 6021 Concord Avenue in Edina, and you appointed me to the Edina Housing Foundation. We're made up of 5 residents that you and the HRA appoint. We all live in Edina, and we support ownership, affordable housing, naturally occurring affordable housing, and affordable new rental housing, of which I'm here to talk to you about today. I'll talk about a potential project on Amundsen Road at 70th and Cahill. The foundation purchased this land in July, and in August we reached out to a number of companies on a select RFP group to interview with potential building opportunities there. From that group we selected 3, and we chose MWF, of which Chris Stoka from MWF is with us here today to move forward with. And we chose them for a number of reasons, and I think I need to tell you about them. They have 20 years experience building in Minnesota. They've built 1,433 units here. They're prepared to build and hold on to their building in the long term. They proposed a mix of 1, 2, and 3 bedroom apartments. Each unit would include their own washer and dryer. There would be underground parking. They're interested in using a new tool in Minnesota called income averaging for affordable housing. And they're interested in working with our school districts, our hospitals, and our areas for the workforce housing that would go into this building. This property was originally guided for 4 stories when we bought it, before you even approved a small area plan, which changed that to 5 stories and 50 units of density per acre. We have 1.25 acres, so that would give us a density of 62. MWF is willing to work with that density and build a building that is 4 stories. It's compliant with the small area plan. It would also potentially give us access to the bike trail that's behind this building. This is workforce housing. It's for individuals, it's for couples, and it's for families. Most of them will probably work in our community. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Swenson.
So as I've talked with you before, the financing of affordable housing is really complicated and it's a long process. And there are certain time lines that need to be met. The first application to finance this proposed development is February 7th. And one of the requirements of the application to Hennepin County is that there is a letter of support from the governing body of the city in which the project will take place. So before you, included in the packet was a letter giving general support for MWF to move forward with their financing to apply. I will be revisiting with you in the future. There's going to be site plan or sketch plan approval coming up in the next month. And then there will be other applications coming up in the spring, which will give an opportunity to ask questions and to dive more into the financing. Inevitably, I will come before you to seek financial assistance for this development. Typically, the rents charged on affordable housing developments can only leverage between 30% and 70% of the debt financing needed to build. The remaining amount needs to come from various government sources, including low-income housing tax credits. Securing tax credits is highly competitive. All the funding sources are highly competitive. Minnesota Housing evaluates multiple aspects of a proposal using a point system. Proposals with the greatest number of points get the tax credits. Cities can play an important role in helping proposals earn the maximum number of points in certain areas, including confirming that the proposal adheres to the city's small area plan and comprehensive plan, confirming the city has a goal of creating affordable housing, providing financing the state is the last source in, and structuring the financing so the proposal gets cost containment points, among others. And again, I will dive into this further. So we're right now, again, just wanting a blessing through this letter of support for them to proceed with applying for additional financing before you have a chance to really dive into the project. If there's any questions.
All right. Questions for Ms. Hawkinson?
I have one.
Commissioner Brindle.
The property was purchased by the Edina Housing Foundation. Has the property been sold to MWF, or does the Housing Foundation still hold it?
Chair and Commissioners, the foundation still holds the property, although we have entered into a purchase agreement with the foundation, or with MWF Properties. They have to be able to secure the financing prior to conveyance of the property. It is likely that how it traditionally happens is that the conveyance of the property happens at the same time as financial closing with all the multiple sources of funds, and it all happens once at the closing table.
Okay, and you refer to we. How is the city involved in this?
I apologize. I also help staff the foundation, so I wear dual hats, and so I sometimes throw out we often. The city's role at this juncture, it is anticipated that the project will need from the city $700,000 of gap financing. The form of that financing is yet to be determined. One option is that the HRA could acquire the land and sell it to the MWF at a discounted. It could be that form. It could be a combination of TIF and deferred financing. We are still working out the details of the flavor of the financing and the exact amount. We need to do some more underwriting.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions at this point in time for Ms. Hawkinson?
Not necessarily a question, Mr. Mayor, but Mr. Chair, just a couple of comments, if I may, because the site plan was provided as well as the elevation. So I'm just really pleased that the plan is submitted conforms to the small area plan that was recently approved. So that's very encouraging. And I understand that this is in the very early stages of development, and so the site plan and the elevation may not be what appears in the sketch plan. Just a comment that because this is likely the first part of development of the node, the character, the historic character and what's intended there in this village look and feel is probably important just in terms of design. So I just want to mention that there are lots of things that can be introduced there that don't really add cost to the project, that can allow that to fold in. I think it can set the tone, actually, and probably will, for what happens there. So just a couple of things. The regional trail, the regional bike trail, is an important factor there. And all the parking that I see here on the site plan is to the east of the building. And so that trail runs right through the site there. So it's a consideration. I ride that every day, weather allowing. I go north one day, south another day. So the traffic in there might not be as supportive of the riders as possible. So moving the parking onto the west side of the building on Amundsen probably makes a little sense. Last thing is the tot lot that's there. It seems like if we're going to have 62 units in there and families, it's limited in terms of an amenity. And it doesn't really allow residents to gather, to enjoy the outdoors, to be outside, to move around. And it's just something to give thought to as we approach and before it goes to Planning Commission. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Got a question for you. What's the date of our first city council meeting in February? Is it
February 5th.
Okay, and this letter is needed by the 7th?
They will be Chair Commissioners, they will be packaging up the application. There's this uploading process with Hennepin County, so the developers tend to upload the day before because the system has a history of crashing, and so you don't want to wait to the last minute. But yes, they would be uploading on the 6th.
Okay. And for purposes of this potential project and MWF properties, could the letter of support come from either the city or the HRA?
Yes, it could.
All right. Here's the reason I asked that question is we're in one of these situations where it's nobody's fault, but we've got these two parallel tracks we're running on here. The county has their track. We have our track. You're asking for a letter of support for a project that's never even been filed. I mean, no one's filed a preliminary request yet to have us proceed with even looking at this project on even a sketch plan basis. So here we are trying to figure out how to thread the needle on offering some level of generic support without making neighbors or anybody else interested in this project, whether they're for it or against it, think that this thing hasn't been prejudged. And it's really an awkward spot for us. So with that in mind, I spoke last night with a county commissioner who said she was going to get back to me today with the type of letter of support that we needed, because I think it would be totally inappropriate for us to be offering a level of support that causes people in the general community to think that this is a done deal when nothing's even been filed in the form of a request for a project. And we've got all kinds of process to go through. We got sketch plan to go through. We got preliminary approval process to go through. We got final process, approval process to go through. And there's public hearings all the way along the way, except at the sketch plan level. But at the preliminary and final level, we got public hearings where people can come and tell us whether they're for or against the project. So as we think about what we have to do and how we have to be neutral, then we have to be fair and open-minded for ourselves in terms of whether we're going to eventually approve this project or not. To then come forward and say, well, now you want a letter of support from us before we've even started the process to be able to meet the county deadline for getting potential funding for this project. It really puts us in an awkward place. And I don't know quite how to finesse that problem, because I can see where we could say, yeah, we support affordable housing. We've got an affordable housing policy. We know that this project is being proposed at 70th and Cahill, but we haven't even seen it yet. So I don't know quite what to do here, other than what I'd like to do is, if the project can be supported generically, or we can support the notion of affordable housing generically, I'd like to wait for feedback, which I'm supposed to get today from the county commissioner, the chair of the county board, on what they need to see in the way of support, and defer this matter to the council and let the council deal with it 2 days in advance of when a letter would be due. Manager Neal.
Your Honor, we recognize all those same conflicts as well, and we had those same concerns. And we've had contact with county staff and those discussions as well. And so part of how we drafted this letter was really to try to thread that needle too. And one of the reasons for having the HRA be the party to endorse this is that the HRA is not the party that, except you're the same people, of course, we recognize that, but you're not the same party that has to grant the regulatory approvals. The city council does that. The concern, of course, is that because of the cycle, because of the way that the funding cycles work and our approval cycles work, they don't sync very well for this particular project. And the concern is if we miss that cycle, we miss the opportunity to provide some outside funding to this project that would be important. That's really the consequences for it, I think. If there's anything, is there anything else to add to that?
No, that's exactly it. And again, I do acknowledge, and we were hoping the timeline between acquiring the land and then granting exclusive development rights or selecting MWF, we had an escalated timeline in order to try to meet this February 7th timeline. And actually, Hennepin County, last year the applications were due a week later, so our timeline was even shortened. But exactly, there are multiple times for regulatory approvals of this project. It's by no means, I understand the perception, but it's by no means a done deal. There will be lots of times when the City Council and the HRA can voice in on this development.
All right, I'm going to call on Commissioner Fisher here. Based on these issues that you're discussing, I would be prepared to deal with it today, and I think we can deal with it, but I think we're going to have to modify this letter further, and we should discuss this, and I think Commissioner Fisher has some thoughts on this as well.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I agree. I think it's better to come from the HRA because of our role, and one of the things we do is try to figure out how to get more workforce and affordable housing in our community. So I think I'm okay, writing a letter that says we conceptually believe in a project in this location that meets, but I think it needs to say that assuming it meets all of our small area plan guidelines, that it's going to have to go through all of the regulatory process, which we're the financial end of that. It's there's a whole approval process, and I just think there's a way to make this letter. It's probably in that third paragraph, to just say a little bit more about that we're conceptually, and again, I don't know how the other members feel. I'm just saying for myself, I'm conceptually okay saying, yes, I believe in affordable and workforce housing in this location, on this site, if it meets all of the other criteria that it'll have to go through. It's awkward, but, I think we just have to roll with it a little bit. And I think to Member Anderson's points earlier, I have a bunch of similar kind of ideas and questions that would be great to talk about at sketch plan review, about how we can make this project, which I think has great potential, even better. But that's a whole different discussion, and it has to happen on its own track. So, Mr. Chair, I haven't gone in and suggested any specific edits, but it's really just, I think, some simple things that can make it clear that we're not pre-approving anything. We're just saying that the right project that meets all the guidelines, we don't have, we could be supportive of that.
Well, you folks have been talking. I've been doing some editing. You can lawyer and a pen.
I knew if I stretched it out long enough, you'd figure it
out. Commissioner Brindle.
One additional question, and that is, what is the funding cycle at the county? If something is due February 7th, is there something else that's 6 months down the road, 3 months down the road? Is it annual? What is it?
Chair, Commissioners, the Hennepin County application is annual, so it's February of each year. Okay. And we find out the funding award in May. MHFA application for deferred financing and tax credits is June 3rd of this year. They also bumped it to earlier in the year from previous years, so that's June 3rd. In this particular project, Met Council funds are not being slated. The pre-application for that, just because this will be an issue for other projects, is in May with a June final application. They're all annual.
Okay, thank you.
All right, so I think I've got some language that could work. I'll read it to commissioners. So on that third full paragraph, here's at least one idea. The redevelopment of the site at 7075, 7079 Amundsen is conceptually responsive to the community's need for affordable housing to complement the market rate housing typically provided. So I would interlineate that word conceptually after the word is in the first line. And then you go on down to that last sentence, and the last sentence would read as follows. Potentially creating a 100% affordable housing development at this site will help to address the need for new affordable housing for households of a variety of sizes with a variety of income levels, comma, assuming it otherwise meets all city regulatory requirements, period. And then on that last paragraph, what I would do is stop that sentence. That last paragraph has only one sentence, and stop that sentence after the word population. So we would strike out the language that says we're excited to work with MWF properties, which is, again, presumptive, I think. Some people will read that in a way where we're not threading the needle, that we're, that this is a done deal, and this is far from a done deal. So I'll pass this down to Ms. Allison. I'll actually show my fellow commissioners, and if they're comfortable with that sort of modification of this letter, then we could direct staff to recraft the letter, and I'll come in and sign it. So, commissioners, thoughts? Want to see this language?
Thank you.
I'm fine as with what you read, or what you just spoke.
I'm just playing with the position of the word conceptually. Because
We don't even have to use that word. I had the word potential in there before.
yeah,
I don't know what.
well, the redevelopment of the future redevelopment of that site is responsive.
The potential future redevelopment of the site.
The
Because
potential-
it all hinges on
it-
regulatory approval.
Right, right. I think conceptually makes it sound like we're not quite sure, and I don't want to weaken the sentence, because the potential redevelopment of the site is responsive to the community's need for, as we see the concept today, which has not begun any of the regulatory process.
And to that point, we don't even have a concept that we've seen yet. So maybe the use of the word concept isn't a good idea.
I think
we'll send it this way and see if somebody comes up with a,
well, the provision, I think, Your Honor, that you've added after the clause at the end of the comma income levels, assuming it meets the, et cetera. That's the key. I think
That is the key.
here that says we support this, assuming it gets all the necessary approvals through our income levels. So
Yeah.
I think that, or excuse me, income levels through all our other regulatory process. I
So
think
let's
that's the
strike
key.
that word conceptual, and then we'll just, everything keys off
okay.
that one condition.
That's great, because I don't want it to sound like we're waiting for something else to find out if we're really behind it.
Okay. And the request on the motion is that we approve a letter of support, so we don't have to, well, we could approve this specific language, I guess, that we've modified this morning. So would there be a motion to approve the letter of support of MWF Properties application to Hennepin County for deferred financing for Amundsen Flats in the form we've adjusted it to this morning?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Carried. I'll pass this down to Ms. Allison, please. All right. Now, thank you, Ms. Hawkinson, and thank you, Ms. Swanson. The next matter we've got in front of us is we had a petition from some of the folks, probably most of the folks that live out at Centennial Lakes Village Homes Condominium Association, regarding the maintenance fee issue, and we've got a staff presentation. I understand from the city manager that a couple of things. Number one, a decision on this is it's not necessary we make a decision this morning. Number two, the city manager has discussed, I think, with some of the folks from the association, the fact that they could make a presentation to us. Well, it becomes a de facto public hearing when we do that, and when it's never been noticed up as a public hearing. There may be other people that would like to receive notice that would like to testify either for or against it, the petition. So I'm a little bit concerned about that. I'm also concerned about the fact that we don't have a full complement of commissioners here. I think this is a matter where I'd like to have everybody on board as we think about whether or not to continue assessing a fee for another decade that's been assessed for the past 30 years. So my inclination is to have the presentation this morning from our staff, and then to reset this matter, because there's no urgency to it, for a public hearing, and reset it in the way we would normally reset or set a public hearing, which would give people that are interested in this topic adequate notice and an opportunity to be heard, and not just the homeowners association. But I'm open to conversation on that with my colleagues as to how you think that would be best to handle it. But there's something about the way that this has been set up for this morning that doesn't feel quite participatory enough for me. But Manager Neal.
So, Your Honor, the way that we set this up this morning with representatives from the Homeowners Association was really as a presentation to the council, an informational presentation to the council, so that you could then perhaps make the decision that you've just put out to them and to your colleagues here. We've had an ongoing dialogue with them. We think it's important that we present to you the staff's view of this issue. They believe they think it's important that they present as an organization, as a homeowners association, their collective view to you. It's not normally an issue that we would have a public hearing about. There's no public hearing requirement anywhere in the documents, the homeowners association documents, or in the relationship between the city and the homeowners association to have a public hearing. So we've struggled to find a way that folks who have pretty strong feelings about this and want to have a voice directly to the HRA could have that voice, and we felt like an informational presentation to you was probably the best organized way to do that. So that's the reason we set it up the way we did today.
That's a good thought. It's,
Mr. Chair, if I could
yes,
just add.
Commissioner Fisher.
I actually agree with Mr. Neal that it feels like a public hearing, but it certainly doesn't need to be. What I was hoping to happen today, I've read all the materials, but I have a lot of questions. There's a lot of information that I want to start wading through and understand, and I think the more we can get today from all viewpoints, the better. So I look at this as more of an exploration, not a public hearing. So I want all of that information, and then we'll see if we have some gaps in information. We'll identify that today. So if we don't feel comfortable making a decision, and I agree that having Member Staunton here would be better, but at least then he could watch this meeting and get caught up with us, and then we can, if we don't make a decision today, we could reconvene and further that deliberation.
Yeah, those are good comments from both of you.
We've been careful not to give the Homeowners Association the expectation that you're going to decide this issue today. I think they want you to decide it today, but we've not given them the expectation that you're going to vote on it today.
All right. Commissioners, other thoughts?
I just am curious about the HRA's role in this, because typically when we consider things as an HRA, we make a recommendation that goes to the council, and the council makes the decision. So I guess I'm curious, what is the HRA's role in this, and why aren't we just doing this at the council level?
That's thank you, Commissioner Brindle. That's part of the staff presentation. We're going to get very deep into that issue about why this is an HRA and not a council issue.
Okay.
Commissioner Anderson, your thoughts?
Yeah, I believe that the avoiding the public hearing aspect of it is important. Gathering information is very important as well. We're here today, and so are the residents, and I think that's good. Anything that would involve long-term funding of parks or considering this type of agreement isn't really something that should be jumped into, especially this morning.
All right. I'm persuaded, too, I think, by Manager Neal and Member Fisher that we've got folks gathered. It's understood it's informational only. As you say, Commissioner Anderson, we've got members of the association here, members of the community at Centennial Lakes here. Why don't we proceed in the methodology that the staff has recommended, and we'll have a staff presentation. And then I understand we've got like 15 minutes of presentation from association members, 3 speakers that will speak on behalf, 2 speakers on behalf of the group. Okay, all right, let's do that.
I have a quick question before we
Commissioner.
begin. Thank you. So we received petitions from residents at Centennial Lakes Village Homes as well as Edinburgh. Are they considered to be did we not receive petitions from folks at Edinburgh? So everybody was from Centennial Lakes?
That's correct.
I thought some were south of 76th. So it's the address like 7610 or something. As I look back at the petitions, I thought they were. Okay. All
Commissioner
right, I'll
Brindle?
look back.
Okay.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Chair, members of the commission, as indicated, so we have a brief presentation, and there's going to be a couple of us speaking. I'm going to provide kind of an overview and background of Centennial Lakes and how the agreements came into place. Andrea Rich, our financial analyst who has been working on this for the past year and a half, will kind of discuss the financials and the implications and provide some information about the various fees that are collected in Centennial Lakes as well as Edinburgh Park. There are members representing the Park and Rec Department who can address operational questions if there are any. And our city attorney, Amy Schutt, is here, who has been providing legal advice in terms of the contracts for the past couple of years as well. It's a fairly brief presentation. So just to start, the question came up about whether it was the city or the HRA. So the HRA was initially involved in this, and we have over 35 contracts with the properties surrounding Centennial Lakes as well as Edinburgh that address park maintenance. And there are so many of them because there's an individual contract for each building. For example, Centennial Lakes Village Homes are 6 buildings. We have 6 contracts with them. These agreements were put in place back when the park was just being developed, both parks actually. And what it did is formalize both financial support from the adjacent property owners as well as more conceptual support of the development of a special kind of park, as we know Centennial Lakes is. The agreements have been in place since development. I believe the first agreement was signed in 1985, which was for Edinburgh Park, and Centennial Lakes agreements have been in place since 1988. Each agreement is a little bit different because it's based on when the building was granted a certificate of occupancy. There's also some differences in terms of the amount that they pay and what I will call an inflation index, where the rate goes up over time based on inflation. So for some of the individual housing units, there is an inflationary increase, and for some of the other ones, there's not. I'll speak about that. In terms of the office buildings, that's really a square footage calculation, and we'll talk about that as well. I just want to show a few maps. So this is an aerial photograph from 1989. So what I've done is I've outlined the location of where the Centennial Lakes Village Homes would be built. in the bottom right-hand corner, you can barely see Edinburgh, but this is how it started back in the 80s. Now this is current. So this is the northernmost portion of Centennial Lakes, and I've highlighted where Pinstripes is. On the kind of the right-hand side of the slide is Coventry, the Coventry project. This is the center or main portion of Centennial Lakes. Highlighted in yellow are the Centennial Lakes Village homes. The amphitheater is on the bottom of this slide, and the main building is just to the kind of the west side of the lake. And then lastly, this is the southernmost portion where the 5 office buildings are. The office representatives from the office buildings have indicated repeatedly how much they value being on the park in terms of their tenants and the ability for them to get out during the summer and walk around the park and enjoy it. And this is Edinburgh. So this is, you can see Edinburgh is down to the lower portion of the screen. So what I'd like to do now is turn it over to Andrea Rich, who will talk about the agreements and the financial implications.
All right. Thanks, Director Broom. Ms.
Good
Rich,
morning.
welcome. Good morning.
Thank you. What you have in front of you right now are the relevant portions of the agreements relevant to what we're talking about today. So the first bullet point is really, why do we have the park maintenance fee? So at the time of the agreements, it was thought that all of the residents of Edina would benefit from the park, but the property owners around the park would especially benefit from their proximity to the park. The second bullet point is, how do we go about if there's a need to change these agreements? So to change the agreement, it takes agreement from the park owner and 75% of the property owners per agreement. So as Don said, there are 35 agreements. And the last is, how long does the contract run? What's the duration? So for Centennial Lakes, the duration is 30 years with an automatic renewal of 10 years. To get into the fees behind Centennial Lakes, when the project started, so the first fees collected were...
Could you back up to that
Yep.
prior slide? We may have some questions coming as we move along here. So in that Section 10, covenants running with the land, do you know why that language is crafted the way it is? Was there some sort of statutory limitation at 30 years that caused the automatic renewal to be, language to be included, as opposed to just having the initial period set at 40 years? Maybe
I
Mr.
believe Minnesota shortens it, or the maximum amount it can be is 30 years. Because the Edinburgh agreements run for the maximum amount of the state, we're assuming that to be 30 years with automatic renewals of 30 years each.
If I may. Apologies. If I may, Chair, Commissioners, there is actually a statute in Minnesota that limits covenants on property to 30 years. It's debatable whether it would be applicable in this situation because it is a public covenant, but I think that you're correct that it's likely that it was set up that way in order to avoid that statute applying if it were applicable.
Okay. So do you think the inference from this language, the way it's crafted in the agreement, means that the deal was meant to be set up for 40 years, but because of the statute, it couldn't be?
I agree, yes. And we do actually have one agreement that was passed later that doesn't contain this language and instead just goes for a straight 40-year time period. So I think it's reasonable to infer that that was the basis for the 30 years with the 10-year renewal.
All right. Thank you.
Okay, so the fees. Back in 1990, or when we received the certificate of occupancy for each of the buildings, the fee was $15 per unit per month. There is an annual inflation increase for each of these fees. There is never a reduction in the fees, so if the CPI should happen to be negative in any given year, the fee remains flat. If there's a combination of units, again, the fee remains flat. When Pinstripes was being sold and the documents that had been filed with the land were pulled, there were some questions raised about the park maintenance fees. So this caused
As a result, the city looked at the agreement with Pinstripes and then expanded our research to all of the park maintenance agreements. As a result of that, we had a true-up of past payments with the Centennial Lakes Village Homes of $75,000. That came in 2017. And their annual fee was adjusted so that it's now on average for all of the units, all of the buildings, $28 per unit per month. This gives you all history on all of the park maintenance fees. We have Centennial Lakes, the property surrounding Centennial Lakes at the top, and all the properties for Edinburgh at the bottom. We have the commercial properties at the top of each section. What's labeled as the original payment was the monthly payment before we did our review of all the park maintenance agreements, and the current payment is what they're paying now each month. You then have, depending on if the unit is measured in number of units or square footage, what that amount is, and the column right after that is how much then the fee is per unit of measure, so per unit, housing unit, or per square foot for the year. Following that are the termination dates for the contracts. So the 30-year termination dates, beginning with 2018 for the commercial properties of Centennial Lakes, and then if we automatically renew the additional 10 years when they would expire. As I mentioned before, down below, Edinburgh doesn't have that additional 10 years because they're evergreen contracts and just continue to renew. Here's a projection of the fees, starting with 2018 fees and moving out to 2028. So I've assumed a 2% inflation. Going back to 2010, the average inflation is about 1.5%. As you can see, the total park maintenance fees are between $500,000 and $600,000 to the city. What you're seeing in 2022 is a slight uptick. We have the hotel, which will be coming back on board at that point. And then the decline that you're seeing in 2028 is when the Centennial Lakes fees would start to fall off. Here are the financials for Centennial Lakes, going back to 2012 and through our preliminary 2018 financials. So what this shows you in green are the revenues associated with Centennial Lakes, and the orange are the expenses. So as you can see, our expenses exceed our revenues every year. That gap that you're seeing between the two is somewhere between $150,000 and $250,000 each year. So we fund that gap either by utilizing the fund balance, and it's partially offset with transfers from the liquor fund. The current Centennial Lakes fund balance is, at the end of 2017, was about $550,000. So you can imagine that as we take these annual losses, we're not going to have much of a fund balance left shortly. Here's just 1 year look for Centennial Lakes. So on the left, we have the revenues. The park maintenance fees do make up a substantial part of the revenue. That's about 40% in 2018. And then on the right, we have the breakout of expenses.
Chair, members of the commission, I would just like to kind of complete our presentation, just to throw out and what I'd like to do is just point out some items for discussion, possibly, as well as give you staff's recommendation. The first thing, as Andrea has indicated, the expenditures exceed the revenues at Centennial Lakes, as well as some of our other enterprise funds. And based on the dollar amount and the fund balance that we have available, we question the financial stability of Centennial Lakes to operate on its own as an enterprise fund. We had talked to the Park and Rec staff, and if we have a warm winter and a wet summer, 40% of the revenues come from the park maintenance fees. The other come from really the putting operation as well as skating and that sort of thing. So warm winter, wet summer, the revenues would decrease as well. Our concern about early termination may lead to additional petitions. As Andrea has indicated, we currently get about $500,000 to $600,000 annually. The petition requirement is pretty much the same in all of the contracts, where you need to get 75% of the property owners. And I have to commend Lois Ring from the Homeowners Association and the Homeowners Association for kind of organizing and achieving in excess of the 75%. Our concern is many of those buildings are single-owner office buildings, which would require only one signature. And I would suspect that we would see additional petitions. And then just lastly, the contracts are scheduled to expire in 10 years with the automatic renewal. We need to start planning for kind of what the future is when those petitions drop off, particularly or when the agreements drop off, particularly for Centennial Lakes. In light of that, our recommendation, in considering the financial condition of Centennial Lakes right now, we are recommending that we continue the park maintenance fees through the 40-year, kind of the complete term of the agreements, and we start to plan to move the Centennial Lakes operation into the general fund. Our recommendation is to move it into this budget period, the 2021 budget period, and we're making that recommendation for a couple of reasons. We're at the beginning of the next 2-year budget cycle. The other thing is we are in the process of looking at a new financial system where we're looking at the accounting structure, and it would make sense if we were going to move it into the general fund rather than the enterprise to take that into consideration in the 2021 time period. And with that, I'm open to questions as well as any of the staff. And if you'd like to move forward, I can introduce next speakers from the Homeowners Association.
All right. Thank you, Director Urim. Question for Ms. Schutt. You alluded to another agreement or agreements that we have that are 40 years in duration. I know you've been working on this and trying to get the historical background and everything. As we go about the process of trying to decide what to do on what I think is kind of a close issue, it would be helpful to have actual examples of some of the other agreements that we have with some of the other entities out there that are 40 years in duration. So we can see whether there's that pattern there that, at least for me personally, that would help to know what.
There is one agreement that is written as 40 years without this 30-year and 10-year renewal. All of the other agreements on the list that were indicated to expire are written as 30-year plus the 10-year renewal. And then, as mentioned, the agreements that pertain to Edinburgh Park are in perpetuity.
Okay. That's helpful, too, because of those other agreements that you alluded to that are 30 plus 10 seem to also be meeting the requirements of that statute.
Correct.
All right. Okay. Thank you. Commissioner.
Thank you. Is there a reason to consider residential agreements differently than commercial? Are they different beasts? Are they different animals? Should we be considering them and saying that if this agreement is terminated, that owners with other agreements may come forward and ask that their agreements be reconsidered as well? Or are commercial agreements different than residential? Is the 40-year a commercial agreement with a commercial entity? I'm just wondering, are they equal? Should they be considered equally?
Commissioner Brindle, that's a great question. I would say that they should be considered equally. Both parties, the office buildings and as well as the residential, take advantage of being on the park. So I'm having a hard time to say that they could be considered differently. Manager Neal?
Yeah, I would say the same. I think that's less a legal question, more of a political one, or a value question
Okay.
about how you feel about it.
Legally speaking, the setup of 30 years plus the 10-year renewal applies to both residential and commercial properties, and residential properties other than the ones petitioning you.
The methodology for how cost is assessed is different, of course, from the residential agreements to the commercial agreements.
Right.
But the underlying philosophy is the same. You know, that there is a special benefit that accrues to them because of their proximity to the park, and that's why they pay this additional park maintenance fee, and the fact that it was there at the time that the lease was signed or that the property was purchased.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions?
Just a comment on,
Commissioner Anderson.
yes, thank you, on Commissioner Brindle's question. I think that correct me if I'm off here, but it seems if Section 5, Paragraph 1 of the Park Maintenance Agreement is really kind of what establishes the benefit, or establishes the concept of benefit. So I do think it's possible to regard residential use differently than commercial use. It's a matter of perception. I agree that it falls under the same legal entity, but to me, there's a question as to who enjoys the most benefit. And is the benefit being enjoyed in the same way that it was when conceived? Is that still in play? And that's one of the things, I guess, that we'll need to consider going forward. One other question. Quickly, it appears to me that we are almost $160,000 estimated in 2018 as an operating loss. Is that an accurate number?
That's correct.
Yeah.
Preliminary numbers.
Yeah, and so and between Centennial Lakes and Edinburgh, about 262.5 operating loss, again estimated for 2018. Although it has occasionally been higher in the past.
Mm-hmm. Correct.
So one of the things that we will need to consider as going forward is because operating expenses will increase as well. We've got CPI to consider in there. So it occurs that at the end of 10 years, we could be $3 million in the red in operations there. So I thank you for bringing forward the concept of moving it into the budget for 2020, 2021, because the sooner we deal with this, I think the better off we are.
All right, thanks, Commissioner. Commissioner Fisher, any comment at this point in time or questions?
Well, so I just wanted to, I think you kind of clarified it, that there are properties around the park that are in perpetuity going to be, unless we forgive those or modify those agreements, that there's some assessment happening that doesn't have a sunset. So at some point, we talked earlier about, there's some law or rule that prevented us from setting these long-term covenants in place. Something must have changed over time, or we got more creative in how we did it. But I mean, to me, what I'm seeing is that, as development happened over time, there's sort of different degrees of negotiation that was happening, different degrees of what was allowable at the time. I mean, there are a lot of variables there with these 35-some agreements, is what I'm sort of gathering here.
Yeah, Commissioner Fisher, I would agree. Amy, did you want to comment on the kind of the agreements in perpetuity?
Sure, yeah. I will just say these agreements obviously predate me and our firm as your city attorney, but my understanding in reviewing them is they were negotiated separately at the time that each development was coming about. So you're correct that there are variations throughout the agreements, and they sort of morphed with each negotiation. There are, I believe, 4 agreements that continue in perpetuity, and those would be the agreements that are around Edinburgh Park.
Edinburgh.
Okay. I mean, because just theoretically, I sit here and I'm puzzled, and I know, when you're working on a development agreement, there's a lot of pressure. I mean, think about all of them that we're working on currently as an HRA, and reading through those documents, and we're trying to get a deal done, and it feels like 30 years out is someone else's issue. But it strikes me that when you have an agreement for how you're going to maintain the asset that all of that property is going to rely on for its value long term, that you would even contemplate sunsetting it ever. Because the maintenance is a bigger issue 30 years later than it is when it opens, or the first 10 years. The first 10 years is your free, that's your best time. It's now that we need the maintenance. That's why we're replacing bridges and all of that stuff. So that's the part that I just struggle with in general. It's like, well, wait a minute, how did we even get to a place where we ever contemplated that there would be no need for help when we need it most, actually? And so there's a whole nother component of this, which is sort of how do you, let's say we didn't have any agreement. I mean, there's sort of a rationale to, and the rationale was right, it feels, in the original agreement, that those properties that benefit the most help participate in funding the maintenance. If we didn't have any of those agreements in place, is that something you could go and assess for under a new agreement? With any property owners that are on a special, and I treat this park differently than, because of the high level of amenity, than others, and so, and you don't have to answer that right now, but it's just one of the things that I'm sort of thinking about. Another question I would have is, we bill in this case, those 6 buildings, do we bill the homeowners association and then they figure out how to charge that? I mean, we're not sending bills to every individual.
That's correct. We send a bill to the homeowners association.
So we've gotten emails about, my units on the back side, I don't get the same value as someone on the front side. As a city, that shouldn't be our concern, right? Because it goes to the association. They could literally figure out how to tier that cost, or is that our thing?
No, the agreement indicates that the same amount of money will be paid for each unit in the building.
Okay.
The agreements were made at the time that the buildings, the developments on each parcel of property had already been decided. So to your point, they were aware that this was going to be a condominium association when the agreement was developed. They set it up so that the park maintenance fee applied equally to each unit on the property, and each unit is responsible for the park maintenance fee. But it also indicates in the agreement that the HOA will be responsible for collecting those fees from each individual unit owner and conveying them to the city.
Okay. I think that's all I have right now. Thanks.
Got another question from Ms. Schutt. If I look at the last 2 lines of Section 5, the public maintenance charge, how would you characterize that language in terms of dealing with present and future requirements for the maintenance, operating, repairing, replacing, and reconstructing the park? I mean, this is obviously at the front end of the project. It's just being created or hasn't even been built yet.
Correct.
And it strikes to me that they're anticipating not only ongoing needs, but future needs as well.
Absolutely.
So.
Yeah, this fee was never contemplated as the fee that would fund creation of the park. It was always contemplated as a park maintenance fee to continue operation of the park.
Okay. All right, thank you. Any other questions for Director Urim or Ms. Rush or Ms. Schutt at this point in time? Otherwise, we'll bring up the, you want to introduce folks? Director Urim?
Chair, members of the commission. So 2 speakers. The first speaker, I believe, is going to be Joanne Bush, and the second speaker will be Jean Otto, who is a member of the board.
Thank you.
Joanne?
Good morning, Mayor Hovland and Edina HRA Commissioners. I'm Joanne Bakke from 7440 Edinburgh Way, Unit 4303, a Centennial Lakes homeowner for 28 years, original owner. We, the Centennial Lakes condominium homeowners, are here before you to provide multiple reasons why the Edina Park fees and covenants are unfair and outdated. We request that you vote with us to end the fees of 30 years. The HRA Commission should be familiar with the Centennial Lakes Village Homes Association petition signed by over 200 homeowners. On August 23, 2018, Committee Chair Lois Ring filed the signatures with Deborah Mangan, City Clerk. The petition signatures exceed the 75% required to amend the covenants, provided you vote with us to end the fee payments at 30 years, as is the requirement for this amendment. Our Village Homes Association is a non-profit association. This sets us apart from the businesses that pay park fees, as they have revenue and income. Many of our homeowners are original owners and have paid fees for all of 30 years. In 2018, a settlement fee for back price index increases of $75,000 between the City of Edina and our association was reached and paid in full. An additional $81,000 total was paid from our monthly association dues. To put this in perspective, the total paid park fees in 2018 was more than 10% of the association's annual budget. The 2018 real estate taxes were significantly increased up to 25% for some. Our village homeowners are double taxed, yes, double taxed, with park fees and real estate taxes partly due to the Richfield School District referendum that passed, as we are in the Richfield School District. These escalated costs are becoming a very hardship for many, especially the homeowners who have second mortgages. We understand the Coventry townhouses have a similar agreement, except they do not have the price index increase. Their fees are set at $15 per month, and their agreement went into effect about 10 years after our agreement. Coventry townhouses are an upscale property. The Edinburgh townhomes also have set fees with no price index increases. However, they have surpassed their 30-year opportunity to end the agreement. We have affordable housing in 2 of our buildings. The inconsistent park fee assessments are discriminatory to village homeowners. And if we can have the overhead done, we're all set? Okay. 2 of our 6 village home buildings do not border the park. And if you look at the overhead, we have 2 that are actually towards the northern part of this slide. They happen to be 7420 building and 7520. They face Edinburgh Way, or the parking lots. Our property, now almost, as I mentioned, 30 years old, requires...
Can you point out, please, which buildings those are that you're talking about?
Yes. Okay, you got the right slide. All right. All right. So you see the 6 buildings. Now the 2 on top, those are the ones I'm referring to. The one on the left is 7420 building, and the one on the right on the top is 7520. Those 2 buildings, they face Edinburgh Way, or parking lots. Our property now, which I mentioned, almost 30 years old, requires significant funding to restore many items, such as roofs, sidings, gazebos, boilers, plumbing, windows, elevators, and more. Additionally, village homeowners maintain the expense for our 3 parking lots. However, the City of Edina has an easement to our lots. Park visitors park in our lots as well as enjoy the grounds and gazebos. We're presently planning to remove and replant many overgrown trees, as well as pursue many other structural updates. It's imperative in our association planning to continue funding these expenses in a way that keeps our property a fitting backdrop to this beautiful park. No other Edina park imposes park fees on a small fraction of Edina residents. The new multi-million-dollar Arden Park restoration, now at planning stage, has no fees to the Edina residents who live along the border of the park and Minnehaha Creek. The 71 France apartments recently completed 2015, and the new Lund apartment project approved to be built on the Qatar Center property, both border the beautiful Edina Promenade, which includes a water feature. Those new residential projects and the developers do not pay park fees. The city of Edina has an annual budget of about $112 million with an upward trend based on income from new development building permits, reported to be multi-million-dollar value. The city made an interest-free business loan to Simon Properties for $5 million. Our taxes and expenses to maintain our property are increasing. The park fees that have been assessed inconsistently to residents and to village homeowners are unfair and a hardship to many. We therefore respectively request to be relieved of the projected $1 million in park fees over the next 10 years to be paid by our 250 unit homeowners. This amounts to about $4,000 per homeowner. The first covenant's 30-year mature date is March 18th, 2019. The sixth covenant's mature date is December 21, 2021. Therefore, this would be a gradual reduction in fees for our homeowners and a gradual decrease in income to the city of Edina, allowing the city plenty of time to adjust the budget and realize gains from the developmental projects. Councilmember Bob Seward stated at his last meeting, quote, "He trusts the council will do the right thing," end of quote. Also an email response to Mayor Hovland from the city manager, Gordon Hughes, who was the manager when the covenants were written, stated, quote, "At the time, he did not think beyond 30 years," end of quote. This favors a vote with the village homeowners. A generation has passed. In its time, Centennial Lakes Park is maintained by all citizens of Edina. In fairness, we ask you to take this opportunity and vote with us, not against us. Thank you, Centennial Lakes Village homeowners. That's it.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Bakke.
Mayor Hovland, commissioners, Edina administrators and managers, thank you for meeting with us this bold Minnesota morning.
Would you give us your full name and address, please?
I will.
Thank you.
My name is Jean Otto, and I am an Edina homeowner residing in the village homes at Centennial Lakes. I reside at 7420 Edinburgh Way, unit number 6318. I want to thank you for your service to the community. As a public member on various commissions, I know what it requires, and I want to thank you for that. I am one of 250 homeowners at the Village Homes, and I'm here to speak to you this morning regarding the development agreement and the public maintenance charge, or commonly called the park fees, which are paid monthly by our private homeowners for Centennial Lakes Park, a public park. A public park which can be funded with an additional $3.58 per Edina household per year. That's less than 30 cents a month per household. In autumn 2018 publication of About Town, there was an article from City Manager Scott Neal. The article spoke to how it takes a team to build a project, and he's right. It takes a team to build a cabin. It takes a team to build a commercial building or a development like Edinburgh and Centennial Lakes. Village Homes at Centennial Lakes has been part of the Centennial Lakes project team since 1989, when the covenants were signed. The Edinburgh and Centennial Lakes development was a novel, innovative project, taking a gravel pit and developing it into an Edinburgh and Centennial Lakes area into a public gathering spot, as described by Mr. Hughes. The granddaddy of suburban projects, known by various names: mixed use, smart growth, pedestrian friendly, and new urbanist, wrote Star Tribune reporter Larry Werner in 2002. The development team from 1989 is a national model, and it's now time for a team expansion and for private homeowner payments, from the private homeowner payments of Village Homes. Various agreements were part of that project team, and the agreements and covenants vary from entity to entity. Coventry and Edinburgh covenants have $15 per month per unit charge for the public maintenance charge, with no price index calculation. And that was reflected in the presentation that was just given to you. If you look at those numbers, there's a drastic difference between the numbers from Village Homes, what it was at the beginning, and what it is today. And the other ones are staying the same. The Village Homes at Centennial Lakes began in 1989 with a $15 per unit payment of private homeowner funds. However, due to the price index calculation in the Village Homes covenant, the village homeowners now pay private funds in excess of $28 per unit per month. The public maintenance charge for Village Homes is approximately $82,000 a year of private homeowner funds paid to the city of Edina, earmarked for Centennial Lakes Park, a public park highlighted in the guide to the area for 2018. It's a four-season wonderland. Centennial Lakes Park is a gravel pit where children once played amongst piles of sand that were used to build roads and cement blocks. This once gravel pit is now a public park where the smiles and excitement and squeals of joy are seen and heard by people ice skating and fishing. They're racing their model boats, playing mini golf, croquet, gathering for homecoming, prom, wedding, and family photographs. The people gathering at the park are Edina residents. They're guests. They are visitors from the Twin City area, surrounding areas, and the world. There are 22,876 households in the city of Edina, of which Village Homes household units are approximately 1% of Edina households. A team expansion of the $82,000 per year of private household funds paid by Village Homes to a City of Edina team would be approximately $3.58 per Edina household per year. That's 30 cents a month. The proposed 2019 City of Edina tax levy information, which we receive when we receive our property tax information, and you're comparing Edina to other cities in the Hennepin County area. Based on the 2018 information, this is taxes for a $400,000 home. Edina is the second lowest of 20 Hennepin County cities. Edina is second lowest at $1,107, and Hawkins is number 20 at $2,644. There is an opportunity and capacity for a team expansion of these park fees. Monitoring the agreements, the legal aspects of them, collecting the park fees every month, processing the park fees is an administrative burden to the city of Edina. It's time for the park maintenance charge to have a team expansion from private homeowner payments to a public cost of $3.58 per year per Edina household. Mayor Hovland, excuse me, I'm missing my page here. The homeowners of Village Homes of Centennial Lakes respectfully request the City of Edina consider the 30 years of private homeowner payments with inflation increases of the park fees, that we respectfully request that it is fulfilled and the satisfaction of the covenant with Village Homes at Centennial Lakes. And thank you again for your time this morning.
Thank you, Ms. Otto. Ms. Bakke, I had one question for you as a longtime homeowner. Would you come back up to the podium, please? Because I think we want to get this recorded. When so the project was about 2 years old when you moved in.
That's right.
And you've been there 28 years. And I'm assuming that when you moved in, you knew there was a cost, this park fee was in place.
We did.
All right.
It's true.
And was there any discussion then about the duration of that park fee, or just that there was a park fee that had to be paid?
Not really.
Okay.
It was just there.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Anything further for staff? One of the things that strikes me is that, as I mentioned earlier, this, in a way, this is a close call, but when I listen to the homeowners, it continues to be kind of an equity argument. But so I'm wondering, is this an equity question or is this a legal question? I don't really quite have a handle on that yet. You go ahead.
It is
Ms.
an
Sharp.
equity question. There's no circumstances that have changed. As I said, when each of these agreements were passed, it was understood what the development would become, whether it would become a condominium or a office building or Edinburgh Park. Nothing about the terms of the agreement have changed. I believe that the request can be summarized as a request to for you to determine whether or not those terms are still fair.
Okay. And I think Commissioner Anderson raised a good question too, and that was, do the conditions that existed 30 years ago continue to exist today that would cause us to assume that there's some sort of continuing benefit, as Manager Neal says, by their proximity to the park?
Right.
Is that worth, I mean, Resident Otto talked about the potential cost per household in Edina, a little under $4. Gene Otto, a little under $4 per year per household. But for those that live in close proximity, what I understand the average cost to be is less than $1 a day to have that proximity to the park. So anyway, there's a lot to think about here. And I would like Member Staunton here when we make that decision. And I think Member Brindle's question still, why is this an HRA question versus a City Council question, still needs to be addressed.
Yes. So the fees negotiated under these agreements aren't fees imposed by some statutory scheme. They're imposed by the contract. At the time of development, the HRA was the owner of not only the park land, but all of the land and all of the projects. And so because the HRA is the owner of the park, the agreement was negotiated between the HRA and the property owners, rather than between the city and the property owners. So because the HRA is the party to the agreement, it is the HRA that has the power to determine whether or not the park fees are changed or terminated.
Okay. And then would you give us a list of the other entities? I think there were 35 contracts, how those other contracts are crafted in terms of the term, the duration of the park fee? And it's just a simple sentence, you know, if it's a 30 years plus a 10-year extension, give us a citation to the law that was applicable. Maybe it's still the same statute. That might be influencing too, I'm not sure, but it might be.
And I don't think he's suggesting right now.
No, not at all.
Oh, sure.
You had that look like, wow.
Well, that was a
okay.
multi-part question, so.
Right on that.
Yeah. So.
Yeah, when we revisit this issue with Commissioner Staunton here, I think it would be good to have some of this other information.
Sure, and I do have that on a spreadsheet that I can get to you.
Yeah. So for me personally, I'm trying to get beyond the notion that once the city's saying, well, we need the money, and the homeowner's saying, well, we've already paid enough. You know, those are kind of equity arguments
It
on
is,
both
yes.
sides.
There's nothing that's changed, presumably those taxes could have been imposed to start with rather than crafting it this way. There's nothing that's changed,
Yeah.
Taxes were an option at the time the park was developed, but instead of going with taxes, the HRA and the developers chose to implement this system.
Sure. This was the bargain that was struck at the time.
Right. And so there's nothing about the underlying facts that have changed. It's just a question of equity about whether or not those facts are still fair.
And you can't really say that the developer imposed these fees on all these condominium owners, because you could say that, but every condominium owner that moved in there knew this fee was in place when they moved in, or should have known. As a realtor, I'm sure that Mr. Anderson would have told his prospective purchasers that this is a fee you're going to have to pay.
As a matter of disclosure, yes.
Yeah.
Right. I can't speak to what they did or did not know, but I can say that with respect to these properties, the agreements that imposed those park maintenance fees were recorded against all of the properties, so it should have shown up on a title search had one been done by the purchaser.
Okay. All right. All that was, I think, Member Fisher Commissioner Fisher, good idea. You and Manager Neal get all this information in place, so go ahead.
Yeah, so I have a specific question about the parking lots. It's just I don't know how much relevance it has, but it feels like it has some relevance. So the parking lots that are on the back side of the village, the homes there, are those literally public parking lots? Can people roll in there and go to events? And then they would be maintained by the association? That feels odd to me.
Commissioner Fisher, so my understanding, according to the contracts, is that we have an easement over the parking lots for the public to park. I don't have specific experience with there being a lot of cars parked there. It is the responsibility of the homeowners association to maintain them.
Right, so they're private parking
They're
lots with a
private parking
public
lots.
easement. And that's the way they are, I believe, on the
On
west side of the
on the
park
west
as
side,
well.
that's the way it is.
Same.
I mean, if you go over by Whole Foods or by Chuck E. Cheese,
Right. I mean, I park
Same
in what I perceive to be public ramp or parking on, over, call it by Chuck E. Cheese,
Yeah.
because I feel like that's where the public should park to go to the park. Never even contemplate that there would be, I mean, is that the sole place that the homeowners are parking, or do they have other?
They have underground.
So they have
Some
underground. This is like guest parking and that sort of thing. But essentially, it's privately paid for, it's privately maintained, and the agreement said, but the public can use it. You can't put up no parking signs.
That's right.
Okay, I did not know that. To me, this whole thing really does come down to equity, and that's what I'm going to be wrestling with as we contemplate whatever we're going to decide here. I mean, if these homeowners came in and they had the same deal that everyone else had around this park, and they just said, we just don't want to continue it, this would be an easier decision for me. I think the difficulty here is that the deal that was struck, and we can't go back, we weren't in those rooms, none of us were. The deal that was struck seems a little less fair for this group than it is for others along the park, just in terms of escalation and some other factors that aren't the same. And that's what I'll probably struggle with the most in this, is that piece of it.
If I may, the escalation does actually apply to everybody on Centennial Lakes Park. It does not apply, I believe,
Not to Coventry.
Not to Coventry.
Okay.
Or Edinburgh.
Yep.
That's correct. So when you talk about this escalation, a couple things that I want to bring up. As we've just indicated, again, none of us were here when those deals were crafted. For some reason, this did include that price inflator. I think the important thing to point out is that, based on the information that we have, so our records, our payment records that we have access to only go back to 2002. So that's how far we can go back. We really don't know what the payment was prior to that. So when we started this kind of evaluation of the payments, we discovered that Centennial Lakes Village Homes have not had an increase since 2002, which was not according to the contract. So when it was brought up earlier about this true-up payment, the payment that we calculated initially, and we went back 6 years, was over $200,000. And as the HRA knows, we agreed to a $75,000 settlement. If we would have gone back to kind of the very beginning when this price escalator would have gone into effect, it would have been about $1 million. So we have not collected that money.
Thank you.
All right. The other thing I think that's interesting is it's arguable that this agreement was contemplated to be 40 years in length, but because of state law, it just couldn't be 40 years in length. It had to be 30 with a unilateral right of renewal by the city.
Right.
That is illegal. I mean, you could draw a legal inference out of that language, I think, and that's why those other contracts might be influencing here.
Correct.
All right, at least for me. Commissioner Brindle.
You know, I'd like to call Jay Lindgren up for a question. You came all this way on a morning. You may as well stand up for a minute. So take us back. We were up in the community room at a council work session. We might have been discussing and preparing for the possibility of participation in the Southdale renewal when that occurred. And you brought forward that the Centennial Lakes had this agreement in its lease and that it was going to sunset at 30 years, and by law, it could not be renewed for 30 years. Now, this is my recollection of this conversation, and that if it were renewed, it would be renewed for periods of 10 years and not 30 years. Do you recall at all looking into that with regard to what we were dealing with at that time?
Chair, Commissioners, Jay Lindgren with Dorsey and Whitney, Special Counsel to the HRA and the City on redevelopment issues. I do remember the conversation generally. I would also say, just listening to your city attorney this morning, I agree, because there was a point where Manager Neal had me look at some of these agreements, and then I think eventually your city attorneys tried to help bring all the stuff that you're dealing with now. Again, from my perspective, there is a limit in Minnesota law that private covenants can extend on how government, on how charges are funded or collected, can extend beyond 30 years. I get the point that that law may or may not apply to this exact situation. So when I looked at it, I said, well, I see why it was 30 years plus a 10-year expansion. Just, I think, and I have to admit, although it wasn't me, it was my law firm that worked on those agreements. I assume somebody made a conclusion to say this 30-year limitation might apply. Let's structure it this way. But it always looked to me like it was intended to be a 40-year agreement, and that was, not an artificial thing, but probably a belts and suspenders, being very careful so that it wasn't limited by the 30-year limit. Does that help?
It does. It does.
I absolutely agree. I think that area of whether or not this would be a public or private covenant is unsettled law, and if you were going to cover your bases, you would craft it this way so that it didn't matter.
All right.
And so it was good lawyering by Dorsey.
And for the record, Jay Lindgren is an attorney with Dorsey Whitney, and he is the HRA attorney.
One of the other things that I heard this morning, it really isn't related to this topic, but the fact that Ms. Bakke was talking about some of the buildings need rehabilitation, and we've had some of our other condominium associations in the city talk about this, and the roofs need to be replaced, windows need to be replaced, sliding doors need to be replaced, and while you may have a sinking fund or a capital improvement fund, maybe hasn't been funded adequately over the years to be able to handle all these things that are coming up, except by special assessment. A few years ago, we looked at, I think they're called maybe HSAs, or one of the two, you lawyers may know about this. I use it up in St. Louis Park quite a bit, and it's a mechanism by which some of the older condominium associations that need a lot of work done, we can set up a mechanism by which you could we could bond for the projects that need to be done, and then each homeowner gets specially assessed for the cost of those improvements, and they just sit on your taxes, on your property taxes for payment over time, or if you qualify, you'd have it deferred until you sold your home. But it may be a mechanism, so you don't have to go to a private lender, for example, or a bank. Take a look at that HSA, I think. HIA.
Housing Improvement Area.
Housing Improvement Area.
Yep.
Yeah, but staff, if you want to meet with staff on that, might be something worth at least looking at to see if it makes any financial sense for some of the things that are looming now as significant capital improvements that you have to make on your property, and are wondering how the heck you're going to finance these things. Because you certainly want to keep your property up, for all of you, for resale purposes. So that was the only other comment that I had at this point in time. Anyone else on the commission have a comment? Commissioner Anderson?
Just a question, I guess. I heard a reference about affordable housing in part of the presentation, and I'd like some clarification on that. Was that a reference to what's assumed to be naturally occurring affordable housing? Are there affordable housing units in the project? There's 250 units. I think about 222 of those would be considered moderate pricing. Was that your reference?
I think it was actually built as an affordable project.
It
The whole
was.
thing.
I see.
We were leading the way.
Okay.
In the Metro at the time with this very significant affordable housing project right on Centennial Lakes.
So at the current pricing levels, that's a little over 200, 210, 215, 220 at these interest rates. Is there a mix in there of about 80% AMI, affordable housing, on a naturally occurring basis? Or is that designated as that? I'm not aware of that.
That's information I think we can get, but
Yeah.
just for historical perspective, the East Edina Housing Foundation was established to connect people with the Centennial Lakes Village homes and get people who needed affordable price ranges into those units.
Okay.
And so the East Edina Housing Foundation is now the Edina Housing Foundation. But that was how it was created.
Okay, well, good, thank you. It's just a point to consider going forward.
Sure.
Director Urim, you have a comment? Okay. All right. Okay, all right, let's...
Mr. Chair, could I?
Yes, Commissioner Fisher.
I think getting some clarity before we meet again on that would be really good. I know, there are folks in my neighborhood, over in Cornelia neighborhood, that started out in affordable units in Centennial Lakes and then launched into the neighborhood from that. I just don't know what portion. It would be good to know what that was, and if there are any that exist today.
We certainly have access to that data, and we'll get that for you when this comes up in the queue again for the council or the HRA to discuss.
Okay.
Chair, members of the commission, I believe Lois Ring can respond.
I have one legal question.
Oh,
Can you come to the mic?
Go ahead and walk up to the mic. Identify yourself, please, and give us your address.
Lois Ring, 7440 Edinburgh Way. I'm in 4117. The reason we started this early last year was we were concerned about the 30-year due date coming up, which is in March 2019. So the first covenant ends then at 30 years. So I don't know if that makes a difference in your decision of when you have to act. If it goes beyond that date, then do we lose our opportunity?
I think I wrote that date down too. March 18, 2019
Yes.
is the first.
Yep.
It's the first time a covenant could potentially expire. If we granted
building-
your petition, it's going to automatically renew, unless we do something about removing it.
Right.
So, but our
Yeah.
intention would be to act before that first covenant.
Yes, hopefully.
date.
Yes.
Yeah. No, I think we'll have it on an HRE meeting within a month, I'm assuming.
And then to my knowledge, most of us didn't know about the park fees when we purchased. I was not aware of it, and anybody that I've talked with is not aware of it. And our first two buildings, 1 and 2, do not have elevators. So there is where some affordable housing is, I assume. And because of the second mortgages, the initial investment was much less there in those buildings.
All right. Thank you.
I don't specifically know what qualifies affordable housing, but, okay, thank you very much. And I want to thank Don. He's been most helpful working with him, very responsive to any questions we have. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Good.
Okay. How are we doing on time
All right,
for everyone? We've got one more item.
Yeah, we do.
Yep. We've got the amendment to the redevelopment agreement with Pentagon Village up next. And Development Manager Neuendorf has that matter. Manager Neuendorf, welcome.
Yes, good morning. Thank you. The item this morning is in regard to the Pentagon Village development, the Pentagon South parcel located on West 77th Street. In October of last year, this body, as well as the city, approved a tax increment financing redevelopment agreement with that developer. And since that time, the developer has been running on all cylinders to get the site cleaned up and ready to go. They are facing a deadline of June 30th of this year to get a lot of work done, and they've been working hard to meet that deadline. Over the last 2 months, it became apparent that there were some relatively minor modifications that would be necessary on the site. And the developers approached the city back in December with a request to modify the site plan. And the modifications are shown on the screen here. While we're discussing the redevelopment agreement here as the HRA, just to let everyone know that there's a parallel path of having the revisions to the site plan going before the Planning Commission and City Council. With the weather that we've had the last couple days, last night's Planning Commission was canceled, so that site plan review is pushed forward a few weeks. But I did want to bring this amendment to the TIF agreement to the group this morning. In essence, there's 4 changes to the site plan. Staff is of the opinion that each of the changes have a positive or a neutral impact to the economic development goals that we set when we entered into the overall agreement. The first major change is the construction of a larger dual-branded hotel. The Marriott Group intends to build a dual-brand hotel. The original proposal had about 190 some units. The new proposal has about 240 some. So that's a net economic gain to the site. The second change is a change in the design of the extended stay hotel. That brand is intended to be Waterwalk, and they do an extended stay where they rent rooms by the day or the week, but you can also rent a room for a month or for 6 months if you're a corporate employee being relocated here on temporary assignment. The initial proposal had that hotel being constructed on top of a 3 or 4 level parking garage. The new proposal has that hotel on grade. So it's, in my opinion, it's a little bit friendlier site plan. The hotel size stays the same, so that's a neutral impact to the economics. The third element that's changing is combining 2 individual parking garages into 1 single garage. There's definitely some efficiencies that can happen on the site, some cost efficiencies to the developer. The benefit to the HRA and the community is that the developer has agreed to extend their public parking easement from the initial garage to the larger garage. So essentially, the HRA and the community will see more parking stalls available for the public use at no additional cost to the HRA. And then the fourth element here that's changing, or will be considered to be changing, is an expediting of the mixed-use building anticipated to be built on the corner of Computer Avenue and 77th. Initially, that project was expected to be done in phase 2. The developer thinks he can move forward in phase 1. So the project size is the same, the scale is the same, it just gets done quicker, so that's a net economic gain to the site. I mentioned that we've been looking at some of these impacts over the last couple months with the involvement of the HRA's legal and financial advisors at Dorsey and Whitney and Ellers Associates. We've crafted the amendment that's included in your packet this morning. The developer has been very open to working together to figure out what these impacts are. Initially, we did have some concerns to make sure that it is either a net gain or a neutral impact, and they've been really good to work with over the last couple of months, and they are agreeable to the amendment that has been prepared here. So the amendment addresses each of these changes. We're reflecting the revised timing and the changing in scope. We address the single parking structure versus 2 parking structures. We have added some conditions just in case things don't go as planned. We hope to do things faster, but just in case they don't, we added some precautions just to make sure that the public's interest is protected. And then we've also made that minor change to the parking easement that reflects 1 building rather than 2 buildings. Those are the only things that are changing in this agreement. The fundamentals of the initial agreement remain the same. The pledge for future assistance upon successful completion of the project remains the same. The timing of the project remains the same. It's just these 4 relatively minor things that are included in this amendment. So at this point, staff does recommend that this amendment be approved. Based on the cancellation of the Planning Commission last night, I would perhaps modify my recommendation and seek approval of the amendment contingent upon review and approval of that site plan, which should happen in the next couple weeks. So with that quick summary, I will happy to stand for any questions. Our full team is here this morning. Jay Scott with Solomon Real Estate, Scott Tankenoff with Hillcrest Development, our partners on this. They're here for any questions. The city's legal and financial advisors are also here. We're happy to answer any questions.
Good, concise presentation. Just to clarify one thing, and I think this is particularly interesting for me, is that when you talked about what's going to be done in phase 1, it's really most of the project. There's not much left for phase 2 or phase 3, I don't think. So you want to point that out as to what we'll be covering in phase 1? Or what won't we be covering in phase 1? Maybe that's an easier way to do it.
Yes, phase 1 has gotten larger, so that's the positive impact. We do the same amount, we just do it faster. So the slide that's up on the screen now shows the 12-acre site, and when phase 1 is complete, it would look significantly like this. So the whole site would be graded and landscaped and cleaned up. We'd have the 2 retail buildings on 77th Street. Those are single-story retail buildings with most likely multiple tenants. We'd have in the center of the project the dual-branded Marriott Hotel. That's the L-shaped building in the center. On the southern edge of the project, we'd have the Waterwalk Hotel, which is constructed as 2 separate buildings parallel to one another. On the corner of Computer Avenue, in the upper right-hand corner of the site, would be the mixed-use hotel, or mixed-use project, currently anticipated to have some type of food user and some type of office or professional user. And then the other 2 pieces here would be the parking structure in the bottom of the site on the lower left. And then right in the middle, in the heart of the project, is that public plaza. The developer has agreed to create about a 1-acre public plaza that would be open and available for the general public to use and enjoy. And then the last element of phase 1 is the green space on the left or the west edge of the site. That is not the plaza, but that's future. That's phase 2. And right now the developer is working to see if we can bring in an office user or a medical user on that site. But phase 1 would, there'd be a lot of bang when phase 1 is finished.
Yeah, certainly will be. It looks like, if memory serves me right, probably over $100 million worth of development just in phase 1.
The development contract calls for at least 100 or 110, I believe, and that does not include all the costs of the hotels. Each hotel, one of the things that makes this project unique and challenging from an agreement perspective is the hotels are separate contracts with separate developers. So the tax increment agreement is with the property owner and developer who's serving as the master. But when the two hotel entities come in, they'll be applying for separate permits. They will not be able to secure TIF agreements because we're using the tax increment to get the whole site ready. So there will be even more of an investment once you include all those fees.
Great. Commissioner Fisher?
I just have a little bit of a concern because of, you've made clear that this timeline is extremely tight. It's all about getting to these TIF dates and all of that. So we have this little polar vortex. Planning Commission doesn't happen. Even that shift of Planning Commission and council meeting, is that creating an issue? Do we have any concerns there?
I'd be happy to have Mr. Scott or Mr. Tankenoff address that. I don't want to speak for them, but I have a few more gray hairs in the last 24 hours than I did. Because you're right, there's a firm date in order to meet the state requirements and the state timeline. So I don't think the delay helps us, but I don't know if either one of the developers would want to offer an opinion on that.
I mean, if you have a plan forward, figured out, and you're not worried about missing anything, that we don't have to talk about it. It's a concern just because you've been talking about the nature of the timing and all of this.
It makes a rushed project a little bit more rushed. But if you go to the site today, quite frankly, a lot of the initial site grading happened October, November, December. So right now we're in a brief lull as far as activity on the site until spring breaks. So I don't think we're losing any construction time. But certainly the developer and their investors and their lenders need to know if this plan is going to be approved so that the engineers and architects can get the final plans finished up, in for permit, out for bid, and under construction. So the delay is not helpful to that effort, but it's something that is manageable.
Oh, and architects are super easy. You just tell them, just get it done tomorrow. They'll just figure it out.
Mr. Scott? It seemed like Manager Neundorf was kind of begging for a comment from you. So.
No, good morning, everybody. Thank you for the time this morning. Just a real brief follow-up to that question. Obviously, we can't do much with the weather here, so we're all dealing with that. So it's a little disappointing that we had the delay that we did. Timing is critical. We all know that with the expiration of the 5-year rule and trying to get this parking ramp under construction as quickly as possible. So it was disappointing to lose a couple of weeks, but again, there's not much we can do with that. So we have been working with staff at the building officials to try to have an expedited review of plans, foundation permits, and so forth so we can get started. So we originally had hoped to start this parking ramp the middle of February. Obviously, that's going to be a bit delayed now. But with their continued support at the building official level to expedite review of plans and so forth, we would still hope to be able to get in the ground yet in February. And that would be very critical in order to try to accomplish as much as we can accomplish by the end of June. I mean, that's really our deadline. And, as it was before, we thought maybe we could get about 80% of the garage done by that time. So I don't know what 1 week, 2 weeks means, but, we'll have a negative impact at some level. But, right now we've had a good team effort with all of the city departments to support this project and continue to move it forward. So as long as that support continues, which I expect that it will, we'll do the best that we can.
And I know the cold weather is not going to impact you because I saw you walk into the building without a coat today.
Right.
So I'm like,
we're hardy,
clearly
right?
he's not
That's
going to
why
let
we
a
live
little
here.
30 below get in the way of whatever.
Right.
So thank you.
Other questions from commissioners? Otherwise, entertain a motion to approve amendment number 1 to the October 2018 redevelopment agreement with Pentagon Village LLC, contingent upon the review and approval of the site plan, the modified site plan, by the Planning Commission.
So moved.
Second.
The motion second on the motion is stated. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Carried. Good. I just think it really felt good. We've got, there's there's some real things happening out there. You know, millions of dollars spent on dirt work, and at least one hotel contract inked, 5 stories instead of 4 stories. The water walk coming into place. I think a contract there shortly. It looks more real every day, and that makes it better for us all the way around. It's a win-win. So, and we're taking property. I don't remember what the appraised value was, but with the use of TIF and the decisions the council's made, we're going from property valued at probably around 10 million to property valued within a year at over $100 million. So it's a good decision here all the way around. Thank you. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for your good work. You too, Mr. Gleekle. And you weren't meant as an afterthought. I'm just kind of admiring your winter wear as opposed to what we got on up here. All right. Any correspondence that we need to be mindful of? Director Neal? All right. Any other commissioner comments? All right. Then we'll stand adjourned.
It's interesting.